We are live on the Proline TV YouTube channel, Our Lads Football Network, talking Kansas City Chiefs. That's right, the Kansas City Chiefs, not the defending Super Bowl champs for a change, but three-time straight.
You said you had to rub it in there.
I try to get in as anything I can as a Jet fan, because things have been pretty bleak for us for far too long. Anyway, Charles Goldman, he's the one that was just talking from A to Z Sports. So Charles, once again, talking Kansas City Chiefs football for us here. Appreciate your time.
Happy to be here. Always happy to join and chat about the team, the roster, and where things are headed from here.
Yes, this could be an interesting season. I don't know if I'd put the Chiefs in the same situation I would with most other teams that lose the Super Bowl, because there is such a thing. I'm not going to call it a jinx, but there is such a thing where when you lose the Super Bowl in the NFL, history tells you the following year is usually not that very good for those teams. But I think that when you do look at history, some of those teams that have bucked that trend are usually the teams like the Patriots with Tom Brady, the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. So I don't think that's going to be a big deal for this organization. But the big deal really going into the offseason, Charles, more than anything, was all about the offensive line. I mean, it's really anybody that watched the Chiefs and understand what happened in that football game understood that if the Chiefs were going to get back and they were going to put their team in position again to win, they'd have to upgrade their offensive line. And taking a look here as we start, just taking a quick look here, obviously the Jalen Moore deal, which we've talked about. We did the show about a couple of months ago. That's been the big deal up until the draft. And so you had to figure, well, it can't be just about Jalen Moore. Well, it wasn't. So they went out, they put big money on Jalen Moore, and then they spend the big draft pick on Josh Simmons. So I'm actually going to start this interview the way I've ended these interviews the last few times, by asking my guests to give me some sort of an off-season grade, analysis on what you think for the totality with any coach changes or how they've handled the off-season with additions and subtractions, free agency and the draft. So I'll kind of put you on the spot with that question to kind of get things going. How did you think the Kansas City Chiefs did this offseason?
Yeah, I think they aced it. I mean, specifically when we're talking about the offensive line, as far as that goes, and that's been actually a big topic of conversation this week, I think, in Chiefs Kingdom, just because there's kind of a growing sense that, it's not going to be Jalen Moore who gets kind of the first shot, so to speak, that they're going to give Josh Simmons every opportunity to earn the job out of the gate and be the guy. I think part of that has to do with, where his health is at, or where the perception of his health is at. They were, I think, a little surprised and impressed with what he was able to do in rookie camp and where he was at in terms of his progress and recovery from the patella tendon injury that happened at Ohio State. And, really, if you think about the Chiefs and what has been their Achilles heel, I think, for a long time, has been the left tackle spot on the offensive line, really since the 2020 season, right, when Eric Fisher suffered, ironically, the Achilles injury. He suffered an Achilles injury, and that kind of ended his tenure in Kansas City and ultimately his NFL career. And that injury kind of sent the Chiefs into a bit of a spiral, trying to find a solution at the left tackle position, and they've not found a consistent solution there. They had the fellow who's now with the Bengals, Orlando Brown Jr., for a couple of years, but that was really the only consistent figure that they've had in that time frame, who has started and been the starter for multiple years. They haven't found that 4-year plus type solution at the position, which is something they've been desperately looking for. And we're even looking for last season, and we're hopeful they had found a solution last season, and they were a little naive in that. And I think, seeing the way they've attacked the position this season, they've left no stone unturned. as far as offensive tackle goes, right? You mentioned they go out immediately and they invest a significant contract in Jalen Moore, who was the backup to one of the best left tackles in the league for the majority of his NFL career. So this is a guy that was relied upon as a spot starter, someone that the team or an NFL team had faith in to come in and play some meaningful snaps for a stretch or period of time, right? So that's someone who, while not proven, is proven to an extent and raises the floor on what your room can be. So immediately you start off your offseason with that. Then you get to the NFL draft and you don't know how it's going to play out, and somehow it plays exactly into your hands. Not only do you get the player that you would have taken just at 31, but you trade back and get basically a free draft pick from the Philadelphia Eagles to trade back one spot so they ensure they get their guy, and you still get your guy, who's Josh Simmons at pick number 32, and a player that they really liked, that they were higher on than it seems like a lot of teams were. There were some mentions of some character concerns and questions in addition to the knee injury, right, that had some teams lower on Simmons. But this is a player that, had he not been hurt, and it was just the potential character questions, he probably would have gone in the top 15 of this draft, right? Potentially even higher. It could have been the top left tackle prospect in this draft class had he played a full season in his last season at Ohio State and gone to the national championship and so on and so forth, had he continued playing at the level he was prior to his injury. So you get a player that you would virtually never have a chance at getting this player otherwise because of where you're drafted outside of the situation. So you get that player, and a player that they legitimately believe could be their long-term solution at the left tackle position. And that's why I think he's slotted just ahead of Jalen Moore right now. I'd actually, kind of flip him and Moore, Simmons and Moore on the depth chart to have Simmons at the number one spot right now. I think I'm confident that they're going to give him every opportunity to start so long as he's healthy. It's obviously more of a long-term play because, there is the question of his health and, just how good he'll be out of the gate coming off the injury. And they don't want to put him necessarily in a situation where they think he's compensating for something where he's not fully healthy or, gets started off on the wrong foot, because they kind of saw what happens when that happens a year ago when they put Kingsley Suamataia out there and kind of threw him into the grinder as far as, matchups in the early goings. And all of a sudden, he's not the solution you thought he might be at the left tackle position. But it also even goes beyond that, right? They didn't just stop at the NFL draft and adding offensive tackles. They went and got a guy who's kind of like new to football in the position, really, in Esapol out of Washington State, undrafted free agent, right? This is a player who can play left tackle. He can play right tackle, who had a tremendous final season at Washington State. He only allowed 9 pressures, no sacks on the year playing left tackle. Mind you, he's not playing against the toughest competition in the world. It's not the same thing as playing in the SEC. And like I mentioned, he's still a little bit green. He only really started playing, I believe, in college football. I think he only has 4 years of experience playing the game. So a little bit raw, but the type of player who can develop into an asset at the offensive tackle position, whether it's a left or right tackle in the future, that's another guy who kind of raises the floor on the room. So automatically from, last season where you kind of went into it thinking, okay, you're going to have this competition between, really 2 guys. It was Wanya Morris and Kingsley Suamataia. Right now, you've just got so many different pieces, right, who can fill in and play in that position that you're already starting yourself out at a better spot, I think, than they were a season ago at that position. And,
okay.
There's potential, I think, long-term potential for this to be, one of the best offensive line combinations they've had of the Patrick Mahomes era, should they be able to, solidify that left tackle position, whether it is Josh Simmons or Jalen Moore.
And what happens to Jalen Moore then if Simmons wins the job? Does he become like the swing tackle, the top lineman off the bench?
I do think it's a possibility that he could be the swing tackle. I do also think there's something to consider, which is that Juwan Taylor, the right tackle, also had an off-season knee procedure. He had a knee injury late last season. He played through it all. Andy Reid at, I believe it was at rookie minicamp, or maybe it was actually Brett Veach. One of them inadvertently confirmed that that Jawaan Taylor had a procedure this offseason. And, we don't really exactly yet know what the timeline, if there's a recovery timeline, if he'll even be able to start. So I think there's a possibility that, maybe this offseason that, maybe Jalen Moore gets reps at right tackle, right? And is starting on that side of the line if Josh Simmons slots in at the left side. And there's already talk and conversation where Jawaan Taylor has an out year in his contract in 2026, while you've got Jalen Moore for 2 years, slide him over to the right tackle position anyways. It could just be a seamless type of transition there, where,
Makes sense.
And maybe it's Taylor who's taking a step back this year to get healthy, and then coming in later in the year, either as depth or, potentially replacing a guy like Moore if Moore has to fill in for him for a stretch of time.
Okay. Fair enough. Good stuff. Open us up here. So lots to tackle. I tell you what, let's I'm going to save because I definitely want to go over the schedule with you as well. So we'll save that to the end. Lots to talk about there with the schedule, but let's go ahead and get into it. First of all, just you mentioned, of course, the top free agent signing. Overall, what did you think about free agency for the team? Because really Moore was the big name. There wasn't like a lot of money spent on other players. I mean, yes, they did bring in Minshew. People know who Minshew is. A couple of defensive backs. Give me a player out of the free agent class that you think will contribute or might contribute more than people think.
I think, pointing specifically to the defensive backs, Mike Edwards is a player who's already been here and contributed and has shown us what he's capable of. So I think he's someone who can kind of seamlessly slot in and provides leadership to a group, safety group that's, really, I mean, they're lacking in terms of the leadership department. They've got a lot of young players there after Justin Reed's departure. So bringing in a Mike Edwards type, that's a guy that I think, could potentially be a good one there.
Okay.
And then, Elijah Mitchell on the offensive side of the ball, he stands out to me. He's a guy that, had injuries last year and has had really his whole career. His NFL career has kind of been stifled a little bit by injuries. Very reminiscent of the situation with like Jerick McKinnon, where he came in from the same team, the 49ers, after kind of an injury-plagued tenure with that team, and was able to completely recreate himself and really carve out a name for himself in Kansas City. I think, he's got the largest guarantees of, I think, anyone really on the running back position in Kansas City right now this year. And, with that in mind, I think the Chiefs are going to give him opportunities to really potentially, carve out a role and potentially carve out a significant role in terms of a change up to a guy like Pacheco or Hunt. And then, a young guy like Brashard Smith, who could kind of be that additional piece, or someone who's maybe more focused on special teams in his first year, or whatever that may be. Right. So I think that Mitchell's someone who could potentially shine there. And then another name I'll mention is Tillery, the defensive tackle. Yep. I think he's someone who, to this point of his career hasn't lived up to the first round, draft pick potential. But I think his situation in Kansas City is probably better than it has been anywhere else. And he'll have potential to be really a good rotational piece for that team. And, finally, the one that I think can probably transform the team the most, I'd say Christian Fulton, the cornerback. We kind of saw last season, what happened when Jalen Watson was hurt, and when the Chiefs did not have kind of that third cornerback who could be relied upon, and the defense kind of softened up a little bit in terms of the explosive plays they were giving up, in terms of their ability to kind of match up with some of the elite receivers in the league. And I think, a guy like Fulton coming in can really change just the entire complexion of that cornerback room, because now you're talking about a situation where you can roll out, 3 guys in Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson, and Christian Fulton, and really have just a really locked down and versatile group. Additionally, you got a pair of Williamses backing them up. A guy like Najee Johnson, who's played some snaps, has some experience, is trusted. So I think that really, it makes that position group that much better, and better than it was a season ago.
Okay, let's move on to the draft picks now. And we've already kind of touched up on the first pick, but let's stick with that and go a little bit more in depth on the first round pick from Ohio State, Josh Simmons, the former San Diego State kid who played both right tackle and left tackle in his career. So he's got experience at both spots, which is always nice. And seems like an ascending player as well, which is what you want to hear. And yeah, he's coming off the injury, no question about it. But it was a player that was gaining momentum. And as you said, who knows how high he could have been looked at in the draft if it wasn't for the injury and maybe some of those other concerns. But talk a little bit more about why you think Josh Simmons might be a good fit with the Chiefs.
Yeah, really great footwork. His hand placement, his ability to kind of really control pass rushers. I think that is something that the Chiefs were attracted to. Just the fact that, you look at last year and what they really struggled with at the offensive tackle position, specifically the left tackle position, there are some really bad losses where pressure was almost instant. And with a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, you got to give him at least a beat, right? If you can just slow down the pass rusher enough, buy him some time where he can really take in what's out there and, figure out what he needs to do, whether it's, create some of the magic by scrambling around the backfield and buying some extra time, or finding that correct read, whether it's, looking for, the correct check down, or looking for the play as it develops. Where's that second or third read, the longer developing routes, right? The deep throws that were very much so off last season. You can't do those types of things when you have instant pressure, when you have a guy getting beat off the snap. That doesn't happen often, if at all, with Josh Simmons. It didn't happen often, or at all, if at all, with him when he was at Ohio State in college. And there's a lot of confidence in the fact that he can be that as a pass protector in the NFL, that he can buy that time and won't be losing quickly like we saw last year with guys like Kingsley, with guys like Wanya Morris, with guys like DJ Humphries even. So that I think is key. His ability to hold up in pass protection, to buy that extra beat of time for Mahomes to really settle and find his footing, step up in the pocket, or buy some of that extra time, move around, use his mobility to his advantage to find the open player down the field.
Okay, so then talk about, because you mentioned Pohl, which is an interesting UDFA for sure. I wouldn't have been my first choice, but that's why we have you on. And then also talk about how the rest of the line fits in, because you mentioned Kingsley, because we've got him there as a starting left guard. Is that still got a wide open kind of situation? Is he penciled in at left guard? Is that just the hope that he'll win that job and he's the guy? And it's because what's the backup plan if he's not? And then also, you brought up Wanya Morris, and that just hasn't worked out so far as a third round draft pick. So talk a little bit about how and even that fifth round draft pick from last year. Talk a little bit about how the rest of the line shakes out now.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways things could shake out. I think that Kingsley is going to be penciled in at left guard. However, Andy Reid has mentioned that it's going to be a competition between Kingsley and Caliendo, and that's how they kind of envision things right now.
Okay.
So Caliendo was the guy who filled in last season when they kicked Joe Thuney out to left tackle. He was playing left guard for the team. I don't think he was particularly great in that role. I think he's got limitations in terms of what he can do and what he can be. He's not going to get a lot of movement, I don't think, in the running game. And, pass protection was, I would say, mid-tier. I don't think it was elite by any means. And I don't know that he could ever really, reach more than that kind of fill-in type status. I don't think he's a long-term type of solution at the starting spot, which is why I think Kingsley will probably be given every opportunity to succeed there. But he was also given every opportunity to succeed at left tackle last season. So, I think the encouraging thing is that Kingsley started a full game for the against the Los Angeles Chargers in Week 16 at left guard, and that game gave the team confidence enough that he went from being a healthy scratch every week to throughout the playoffs being a game day active because they believed in his ability to play left guard. So that tells me that the team has kind of a plan. They have faith in his ability to play left guard after what they've seen, after viewing that tape. And I tend to agree that was his best game as a professional, and a game that wasn't very good for the Chiefs. Just as a team, that was a brutal game for them. I think I said it was against the Chargers. I think it was against the Broncos, actually, in Week 18 last season. But anyhow, I do think Kingsley is going to probably be the guy unless something happens like injury or Caliendo were to take a big step forward. I'll mention another name that's not really on people's radar right now. I know a lot of people have liked to say, oh, well, Hunter Norzad, he could be a guy. He's someone who looked really good last year as a center. That's not who I'm going to mention, though.
You're not.
I'm going to mention Wanye Morris. I think last year he took some snaps at guard. I think it was right guard that he took snaps at. But I tended to believe that was some of his best stuff in training camp, came at the guard position. And I know that, Andy Heck likes to move these guys around a lot. So he has an idea of what a guy like Wanye Morris looks like at guard, and knowing that, okay, Wanye is not going to be your left tackle. He's probably not going to be your right tackle this year unless, Taylor's hurt or a guy like Moore doesn't work out or whatever it may be, right? So where could you put Morris where he's not just on the bench, where he's, valuable and useful? And I think that, left guard could be a possibility for him. So we'll kind of see how it all plays out. I know they just signed this fellow Tremaine Ankrum Jr. as well as kind of like a veteran. I think that may have a little bit more to do with, the fact that Trey Smith might be, sitting out for a portion of like OTAs or even like maybe mandatory camp as he gets his contract stuff settled and situated. But, I think there's also a possibility that, maybe he gets some opportunity at the left guard position, being a veteran in this league who hasn't played a whole lot, but does have more snaps than some of these younger guys who are kind of green. So that's a potential of what the offensive line situation could look like. I know there will be some people who are disappointed about my Hunter Norzad comments, but I do think, he's the type of guy that the Chiefs like to have on the bench, who can come off the bench, play center, play right guard, potentially even play left guard as that kind of swing backup. He kind of fits more that Nick Allegretti role. And I think, by year 3, they might be looking at and feeling more confident in him as a potential starter, maybe along the lines of, someone were to get injured or something like that.
And they're valuable, no question. You got to have those guys on the bench because there will be injuries, especially the versatile ones like Hunter is. And then also, I know that you had talked previously about Godric as a developmental player. And I don't know if you've heard anything yet about Dalton Cooper, the other UDFA, because I know he's had a long, productive career. Started off, I think, at the Sun Belt or some like Texas State. Made his way to Oklahoma State last year as a tackle. You guys we have him here at guard. Are there any other? You mentioned Ankrum. Any other guys to keep an eye on during OTAs, mini camps, things like that?
I'm still a big Ethan Driscoll fan. I think
Ethan Driscoll.
I think Driscoll's a guy that, could quietly take a step forward after his first year. The Chiefs kept him around on the active, on the 53-man roster all season. You don't typically do that with guys that you don't like, especially throughout an entire season when there might be an opportunity to stash him or, do the IR stash or whatever it may be. So I think that's a guy that they're going to give some opportunities to. Maybe he's like the second team, right tackle, and maybe he earns some opportunities. I think with Chu Godric, it's interesting because, now you've got the international player slot, so he doesn't count against the 90-man roster. He's basically just like an extra guy that they have that they can develop. Okay. They've been working with him for 2 years now. So yeah. This is really going into year 3. I don't know if that means make or break for him or what. I'm sure he'll get some opportunities, but a big question mark just in terms of experience and what have you. At the very least, camp body, good depth, someone who can play tackle, who can probably play guard as well. I think with Cooper and the kid from Washington State as well, the undrafted free agents, I think, tougher path to an active roster spot, but potential for, developmental depth, someone, to put potentially on a practice squad for a season. If a guy like Pohl, was highly sought after in undrafted free agency, I could see him, kind of going the Ethan Driscoll route where they take, keep an extra offensive tackle just because they like the guy and they want to keep him, from getting snatched off the practice squad or on waivers. Okay. I could definitely see that happening. As far as Dalton Cooper's concerned, I do think he's probably going to slot in at guard rather than tackle for Kansas City. He does have the versatility and flexibility to probably kick out in like an emergency situation, but just, obviously looking at the depth chart and where they have the needs and what have you, I do think that he'll probably end up slotting in at the guard position. Okay. And, they're going to need some developmental guys there, some guys who can kind of learn and come up because they're going to need that depth eventually behind, guys like Trey Smith once they get the long-term deal done. Guys like Caliendo and Suamataia, we don't know how long Caliendo will be here. I think he's got, this is the last year that they have control for him. I think he was a restricted free agent, if I'm not mistaken. So he could become a free agent soon. So they'll need to kind of replace some depth there. I'd say the biggest wild card, in my opinion, is CJ Hansen, because he just didn't really look good at all last season. And I think he would probably tell you that himself too. There was kind of a big jump from Holy Cross to the NFL. Big jump. I think, how does he do in their system and their offseason program in terms of his weight, in terms of his physicality? Can you hold up a little bit better in the run game and the pass game? I think, there's possibility that, maybe this guy takes another step forward that keeps him around longer. I also think there's a possibility that, someone else could jump him on the roster and he could be cut after 1 year in the league with the team. His late round pick, I don't think that they'll be crying too much if he doesn't work out, but the ball's kind of in his court for how he kind of addresses and bounces back from the rookie season.
Do you think, and then we're going to move on, but do you think that it's still one of those situations where if there's an injury or two along the offensive line to a couple of key starters, that it could be a big issue, or are they better prepared to handle that in the short term this season?
I do think they're better prepared to handle that. I mean, if they, if you run into 2 injuries at the tackle position, I don't care what team you are, you're going to be in tough water. It's just kind of the name of the game. Teams just aren't that deep at that position. I do think their depth is above average at the interior offensive line. I think, again, having a guy like Hunter Norzad, who's going into year 2, who had really a strong season as a backup in year 1, I think that's a boon to this roster. If, any of those trio of interior guys were hurt, that's the guy that I think they would probably lean on the most. I think there could be a situation, say there's an injury at like left guard. right? Maybe they kick out Creed and put Hunter at center or something, right? There could be something different that's a little bit unique that fans might not consider, but that the team might be a little bit more comfortable with in terms of that regard. If the depth at the left guard position isn't quite as strong as it might be thought of.
Okay. All right. So let's move on now, because we obviously had to spend a lot of time on the offensive line. That's what it's all about with the Chiefs. We spent almost half the show talking about the offensive line. So let's take a look at the rest of the draft picks, at least. Starting with their second round pick, let's move on over to the defensive side. And so they get Norman Lott in round 2. And I guess the thing with Lott is just really his lack of experience. I mean, even though he's played around, he's been around a long time. He's had 4 or 5 years of college ball, but he's only had, I believe, 4 starts. Not a whole lot of production, but there's stuff to like. And you would think that the Chiefs are seeing that. Do you believe though that he's going to be more looked at as a pass rush specialist? Or do you think the Chiefs see something more in him?
Yeah, I think if you look at kind of his splits last year, like he was a really good run defender as well. And you look at the Tennessee defense, they're extremely deep along the defensive line, and their defensive line coach kind of had the philosophy of rotating that group heavily. I don't think there's a single player who played like an 80% snap count or anything like that, right? They were constantly rotating these guys, and Norman Lott was one of their most highly productive pass rushers in terms of pressures, and in terms of pressure rate. And I think there's an analytic element to this where the Chiefs were looking at it like, okay, we've got a presence to replace in Tershawn Wharton, and a player like Omar Norman Lott can be a Tershawn Wharton replacement in year 1 at the very least. But I do think he's not just a situational pass rusher. He's not just a guy who's going to be a third down type of player, third down, fourth down type of player for the team. I think eventually he has the ability to be more than that, to be a 4-down type of player. And in there with Chris Jones, down after down, snap after snap. I don't think that the rotation at Tennessee was reflective of his ability at all. I think had he been in a different situation, or had there been more injuries along the defensive line or something like that, he would have seen more opportunities. It was just a matter of the situation impacting him more than anything else.
Were you surprised that the Chiefs took him as high as they did, considering I know our lads graded him as more of a round 5 at the highest, kind of day 3 pick. So were you surprised when you heard his name called, or was this a name that you had heard about?
Not really. Just listening to Brett Veach speak ahead of the draft, and I know that Chiefs fans have this thing where they're like, you can't trust anything that the GM's telling you. You can't trust what the coaches are saying. The Chiefs are notorious for being honest. They will tell you the truth if you listen. They won't necessarily lie to you. They won't necessarily tell you half truths. They might do something different, at a moment or whatnot than what they're saying, just because the opportunity presents. But Brett Veach said in his pre-draft press conference ahead of the draft that they felt that the edge rusher position was the strength of the defensive line in the draft, and that the interior defensive line position, specifically the pass rushing 3 technique type, was light. It was slim, and that the drop off was steep. So, seeing the Chiefs take Omar Norman Lott at the top, or I would say the bottom of the second round, that does not surprise me, because I do think there was a view that there was significant drop off after Omar Norman Lott at that specific type of position, and that was a position that they were targeting, that they thought, okay, if we don't get a guy for this, we could be in trouble, right? We might not have that type of player, and we want to still have that type of player. So I think that it didn't really surprise me. He's a guy they brought in for a top 30 visit too. And as was Josh Simmons, a lot of people are like, top 30 visits don't matter. They matter. They matter for this team. It won't
That's their
always
history.
be.
Yeah.
It won't always be the top draft pick. Sometimes they'll be late round guys, but at least in the case of this particular draft, the team leaned heavily on some of the information they learned about these players in those top 30 visits, and they definitely came to play with the first 2 picks.
Considering you can play a variety of roles, what do you think there is a role that they have in mind for him?
Yeah, I think it's that pass rushing 3 technique, at least like in his first season. I don't think he's as quite refined of a rusher as Tershawn Wharton is. Obviously, Wharton's played 5 years in the league already, right? It's a little bit of a different scenario, but I think you look at what he kind of does well. He's very disruptive. He's not always the type of guy who's going to win with a plan, but has a second move in mind where he can get free. I don't think he's going to win one-on-ones quite as frequently as like Wharton did, because Wharton was just kind of a little bit on a different level, I think, athletically speaking. But he does have the ability to win those one-on-one matchups when Chris Jones demands the double team. He also can really Jones can play off of him and like the games, the stunts, and the looping around movement game on the defensive line, stuff like that. So I think that's going to be beneficial to his ability to see the field and impact the game early on in his career.
Okay. Before we move on, I'm going to remind everybody about ourlads.com, because the draft review guide is going to be out next month, late in the month, but that's what we're working on right now. Matter of fact, this is why I have to have these interviews with Charles. I mean, not have to. I mean, you don't have to convince me to do this. But this is what helps me be very smart when I'm running up my team articles here. There's 32 of them for all teams. Everybody gets a page. We break down the draft, a little bit of information regarding the draft and the players and free agency and UDFAs and all that kind of stuff. We also give a grade. So check it out here. There'll be a link in the description of this video that you can check out when it's available on demand. Okay, so let me see here. Let's make sure. Okay. By the way, William, thank you very much. Glad you had the opportunity to stumble upon this. This is the best way to find out about some programs sometimes, is when you accidentally stumble upon them. So we'll hope that you'll be here as a longtime viewer, not just here at Proline TV, but of course the Ourlads Football Network at ourlads.com. And I'm going to have links in the description of the on-demand portion where you can find out everything to know about Charles, where to find out about the articles and the podcast and all that kind of stuff. So look forward to that, William. And thanks for the comment there. Okay, so let's stick with, might as well. There's a few more players to go here in the draft on defense. Gillotte from Louisville, an edge rusher. It seems to be like a fundamentally sound player, a power type player. Didn't have the production this past year that he had in previous year, but I like this guy. This was one of those guys that you kind of knew was going to get drafted in the middle rounds, that you just felt, yeah, I think he's got a chance.
Yeah, and when you get down to the other stuff, when you tear away the football of it all, just a really good person and character. As far as what the Chiefs like and what they're looking for, I think he'll be a great fit for that in the locker room, which is obviously a good thing. I think defensive end edge rusher wasn't really on a lot of fans' radars as a big need, but when you kind of look at it, you've got George Karlaftis, who's going to have he's on the 5th-year option next year.
Right. They can't keep both McDuffie and Karlaftis, can they?
Well, they're going to try. If the salary cap keeps going up the way it does, I think they have a pretty good chance to keep them both. But that being said, they're going to have to make some other changes, right? And some of those changes are probably something like moving on from a Mike Dana, who has a contract that you can move off of, in a year, and you have a guy like Charles Omenihu who's playing for a contract that he thinks he's owed or deserved, and I don't know that he's going to earn that in Kansas City if he does have the type of season he wants to have. I think that might be earned elsewhere, and good for him and great for him if he does that. I think, adding a guy like Gillotte to the mix, that's going to definitely be something that helps the depth of this unit that I think kind of underperformed last season.
Yeah, I think they needed it. Yeah.
I think they were kind of expecting a little bit more juice from their pass rush. I don't think Felix necessarily took the jump forward. He did take some steps forward, but I don't think he took as big of a jump as they were hoping for.
First round pick.
I think he's developing into more of a rotational player, and I think they're okay with that.
Okay.
But they need someone to kind of be more of a force there, and they're hoping that Gillotte can be that and can kind of pair with the guys they have to create a pretty good, solid rotation, keep some legs fresh, and just have a good group throughout the season. And obviously with BJ Thompson in that situation, they waived him with the PUP designation, have him on a reserve list right now, and they're working with him, hoping that one day he can resume playing. But right now, the understanding is that he's not going to be playing, in this upcoming season. So it seems like, his future with that being a question as well. That's a young player that's taken kind of out of a premium position that you've spent a pick on in the past. So you got to kind of replace that and add another guy to the mix there. And I think Gillotte is going to be that guy who can kind of really slot in and, potentially fill more of that like speed rusher type role. Very, very disruptive, just has an absolute metric ton of pressures during his college career. Didn't always translate to sacks, but, as we know, pressuring the quarterback can be just as effective and as important as creating the sack. And, sometimes at the next level, those sacks will come. And he's also got quite a few tackles for loss, which also tend to translate from college game to the NFL in terms of productivity, getting into the backfield and, tackling the ball carrier, be it a quarterback or a running back.
Okay, before we move on from the defensive line in totality, was there anyone else? I know that they had a couple of guys last year. We can see on the 3 deep, some CFAs, and then you also have one this year, and Izzard, another free agent, and Robinson. You mentioned Tillery before. Anybody that sticks out for the fans to keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think the guy that you want to look for is Fabian Lovett Sr. Mike Pinelli joined a Chief show, Chief Concerns, with former Chiefs tight end and my friend Marcus Dash, who run that show. But anyhow, he joined that podcast, and he mentioned to them that Fabian really reminds him of himself coming into the NFL in terms of player and body type and just what he brings to the table. And I think, when you're looking at the defensive line group for Kansas City, they didn't really add like that kind of true nose tackle type. They have Ika on the roster after they added him kind of late in the season to the practice squad. So he's a guy who could maybe potentially fill that role. But I think, Lovett is someone who naturally fits in kind of behind Pennell, who can be that guy as Pennell kind of reaches the late stages of his career. And he's the type of guy who can maybe take up that mantle from Pennell as things kind of change, as Pennell starts to maybe potentially get phased out in Kansas City.
Okay. Let's now move on to the next defensive pick, which was their next pick in round 3. Noel Williams, another player with a lot of experience at Cal, former UNLV player, good size, even better length. And what you see here, and what we're going to talk about with the offensive guys, is the fact that the Chiefs love those playmakers, and this is one of them on defense. So this kid, I think he had like 14 career interceptions in college. Still has to work on maybe being a little bit tougher against the run, but hey, he's got a lot of things to like about him. So what do you think is the specific reason why the Chiefs wanted to get him?
I mean, I think the ball skills stand out for everyone. I think he led the FBS in interceptions last season with 7, if I'm not mistaken, 7 or 9, something like that. Like he had a ton of picks. And he's just a really, really standout player when it comes to finding the football and being around the ball, making plays on the ball. I think he fits kind of that press scheme that they like, playing physical in the line of scrimmage, the one-on-one matchups. I think he can do the match coverage game. I think, zone coverage, obviously he's shown the ability to play zone, play, off the ball and close, click to close on the ball. But, what I really like about Williams, he's not the fastest guy, but he still manages to just stay in phase really well. Locate the football. So, I think, long speed is going to be kind of a concern. You don't want to match him up with like a burner as far as a receiver goes. Probably more of the guy that you're going to want against like the big physical, like X receiver type, where he can go up and contest and, really put his hands on guys, play a little bit more physical. But man, yeah, I think he's a great fit for what Spags likes to do. And, he's another guy that, with alongside Fulton and Watson and that whole group there. I mean, you look at the Chiefs cornerback group and, outside of McDuffie, you just got the 5th-year option, and Fulton, who they just signed. I mean, Watson's a free agent. Johnson's a free agent. Joshua Williams is a free agent. So like they're going to potentially lose a lot of their depth next season. I don't think you're going to be able to pay Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson. I don't think you're going to be able to pay both of them. And I think they've already made their decision kind of known with, enacting the 5th-year option with Trent, and if they can agree to a long-term extension, then, that would probably be great in what they're looking forward to doing there. So having a guy like Williams who can come in this year, and maybe he's not expected to start, but he's playing key depth. He's getting up to speed on special teams, right? He's another guy who has special teams return ability as well. So he'd be playing punt returner role. You never know this year, but so maybe he's more of that depth player in his first year, and then kind of takes over as potential starter in his second year as a pro.
Okay. And before we leave the DBs, so we talked a little bit about Edwards and Fulton before. As far as the free agent class, there were, as we can see here, 5 UDFAs that they signed. So this is really where they attacked as far as the UDFAs. So, and again, you explained probably one of the reasons why they did that. Is there a player here? The one that sticks out to me is Melvin Smith Jr., but is there one that sticks out to you, or that you think the Chiefs might, kind of favor out of this group?
Yeah, I think, if you look at what they did at the cornerback position this year, they really strengthened their outside cornerback group. And I think that was intentional because Trent McDuffie played more outside corner last year than he has in any previous year. And I think they want him to focus more on playing the slot because that's where he's excelled. That's where he's really, really done the best. But within that, I don't think they have a lot of strong depth at the slot cornerback position right now. Like I really think that that's kind of an area that they're probably going to be looking to improve at. And I think, a guy like you mentioned, Melvin Smith Jr., I think he's a guy who could kind of slot in at the nickel and play that spot for Kansas City. And if I had to guess on potentially one of the guys surprising as far as UDFAs to make the roster, I think right now he would be my guy. It'd either probably be him or maybe Major Williams, who's undrafted free agent tryout signing that they had from rookie minicamp. Impressive kid. I heard a lot of really great things about him, not just on the defensive side of the ball, where he just same podcast. In fact, that Chiefs Concerns podcast, wealth of knowledge there. They spoke to Major Williams, and he told them, kind of the moment that he really felt that he made the team, he made a check in practice, and that check resulted in him getting an interception on the play. And, that impressed the coaching staff. And then he also made some plays on special teams, has some ability as a return specialist as well. So not only does he have the chops to be making calls in the secondary and ones that are effective in making game-changing plays, but he also has the ability to impact the game on special teams, which the Chiefs love. Anytime you can have a dual role like that and provide, valuable depth at position of need, but also provide special teams ability, the team is going to look at you as as someone who's valuable. So I would say those are the 2 guys who are most on my radar heading into OTAs right now, as potential guys who could impress and end up with a surprising and landing with a roster spot.
And again, you believe that will McDuffie start out on the outside? Will it be one of those? How are they going to work that?
I still think he'll have some opportunities on the outside. I think as far as trust goes, he's the most trusted cornerback in the room. So if they have a situation where they have a player who moves around, who shadows guys, I think it's going to be McDuffie. So I think he could follow some guys around, and how they kind of situate that with the rest of the cornerback group kind of remains to be seen.
Okay.
I think last year they played a lot of Chamari Connor at the nickel position, but I think this year they might kind of try to move him back to playing safety. I think they kind of learned last year that he has some limitations at nickel. So I think, moving him back to the safety spot is a possibility. I know that Chris Rowland-Wallace is a guy that I like a lot, and he could take a step forward this year, and he could potentially be that extra nickel guy if McDuffie were to move outside for certain snaps, and they need that third cornerback to slot into the nickel. I don't think they're going to play Fulton or Watson or even Noel Williams there in that slot spot, which is why I think McDuffie, they're going to do what they can to kind of keep him there and have that be his home as much as possible. Okay. But at the same time, I also think he's just too good a player. You can't really take him off the field, right? You want him on the field. Yep. You want him being your number one cornerback. So, if you're in situations where a team's in base defense, you only have two cornerbacks on the field, right?
He goes back outside.
He goes back outside. Okay. In the situations where you got three, you have a little bit more flexibility. You can play him inside, you can play him outside, depending on the matchups and what you see.
And you said Melvin Smith, you think his best spot would be nickel?
I do think his best spot would be nickel. I think just given his size, given what he showed at the Senior Bowl, I think, that'll be when we get to OTAs where he primarily lines up. I do think he's a similar player to McDuffie in the sense that he does have the ability to play outside as well. Like, I don't think his size is going to just, strictly stick him at the nickel spot. But I do think, that'll end up being the spot where he's most effective in the NFL.
All right. Let's talk linebacker, because that was pick in round 5, Jeffrey Bassa from Oregon, another player with a lot of experience. He played inside, but it looks like he would probably – now we've got him here as a middle, and again, that maybe that's where they like him. But I also know that our scouting reports say he might actually fit well as a will. So let me know what you think there. And look, this is a player that doesn't have big size for the position, but that has a lot to do with the fact that he was a converted safety who moved on down to the linebacker position. But hey, he's got 3 down potential and is a really good value pick, I believe, where they got him.
Yeah, I agree. I think, this was another situation where I don't think linebacker was really on a lot of people's radar, but the value was just too good to pass up. This was a guy that a lot of very talented NFL draft evaluators had in their top 100. They got him 40 slots later, right? Like it's a very, very good value as far as what he can potentially be and develop into. I think you're right on the money with his roles. I think, right now, Mike depth, but has potential to slot in as a maybe starting will linebacker in the future. And I think that'll kind of be, the way his role is viewed as right now is kind of more of depth play. I think that the starters are going to be clear: Nick Bolton, Drew Tranquill, Leo Chenal, when they have their heavy set out on the field. But you look at, what the future holds, right? We have that tremendous 2022 NFL draft class coming up for contracts in the next year. So a guy like Chenal, are you going to be able to keep him? I don't know. A guy like Drew Tranquill, he has an out year in his contract coming up in a year as well. So suddenly Nick Bolton could be the only, veteran guy who's really out there and, playing that role. And, having a guy like Bassa waiting in the wings for whenever you have to make a decision on Chenal, whenever you have to make a decision on Tranquill, that can really help you in terms of continuity of your team. He can learn a lot this year, He's just, I mean, I'd say the linebacker room on the defensive side of the ball might be as talented as it's ever been for Kansas City. And you look at a guy like Brandon George, he's just a tremendous athlete that they added in undrafted free agency. Guy like Cooper McDonald, who defied odds and ends up making an already stacked linebacker group. Like they could have just not added him, but he did enough at rookie minicamp to earn a contract as a tryout player. That always is something to keep an eye on. That impresses me a ton. But then you look at the veteran depth that they have in there. They have a guy like Jack Cochran, who's coming off of an ankle injury, I believe, who is someone that, they like on special teams a ton. They also like him on, on defense as well. Have him kind of as like a backup at both, weak side and Mike linebacker. Someone, if like Nick Bolton got hurt and Drew Tranquil, they want to keep him at will, they'd probably put a guy like Cochran. He'd probably be next man up.
Okay.
And Cam Jones, guy who's played in the system for a while, primarily as a special teams guy. And then a guy like Cole Christensen, who's been, the type of salty veteran that has done anything the team has asked. He's played on the active roster. He's played on the scout team. He's played on the practice squad. He's really done it all for Kansas City since he's been here. And he's a guy that I know that they trust as well on special teams and on the defensive side of the ball, that he's a guy who could come in and, wear the green dot. And, to double back to Jeffrey Bassa, that's something that he did at Oregon too. He was the guy who was making the calls, setting the defense for Oregon. So he has that experience as well. So you just have a ton of leadership and a ton of really talented players in that linebacker room right now. They're going to cut good players. Like there's no doubt about it. Like someone in that room is going to get cut and they're going to get picked up either on waivers or get a contract somewhere else pretty quickly. And, it's not just going to be the talented, UDFAs who people are wanting to take a swing on. It's going to be some of these veteran guys.
Okay. Let's move on back actually to the offensive side for the last two picks, starting with their fourth round pick, Jalen Royals. And this actually has Andy Reid written all over it. This is just, we're talking about Noel Williams as a playmaker on defense. Well, they added two more playmakers on offense, basically the type of kids that you just didn't know if they were going to fit. I mean, you knew they were talented, could be really good players in the NFL, but it all depended on where they go. What kind of a coach was going to draft them and then know how to use them. And then neither kid could have gone to the better place than the Chiefs, starting with Jalen Royals. The fact that he had, what did he have? Over seven touchdowns of 50 yards or more in 2023. That was a huge year for him, obviously. He led all the nation in college football, FBS in that. He's got a thick frame. He's kind of tough to tackle and all that. So really nice kind of piece that Andy Reid is probably extremely happy to have on the team.
Yeah. You just kind of knew that they were going to add someone there. I think between Rashee Rice, the uncertainty with his off-field situation and the uncertainty with how he's going to recover and come back from the knee injury, I think that was key. And then, obviously you've got, a guy like Hollywood Brown who didn't play a lot last season because of his injury. You got Xavier Worthy going into year two. You got Sky Moore, who, hasn't done much of anything to this point. You got Juju Smith-Schuster, who's a year older, but a salty veteran, guy they really like. And you got Nico Remigio, who is obviously a guy who they like on special teams, but hasn't really taken a step forward thus far to this point as a receiver. We don't know if he'll do that this year or not, but really encouraged by what I've heard about Royals so far and what he can do for this offense in terms of just kind of being, a guy who can absorb a lot this year, play a few different roles potentially. If they're easing Rashee Rice in, he can play a similar role to Rashee Rice. It's kind of more the catch and run, yard after catch type receiver.
Oh, yeah.
But he's also, not a slouch on the deep routes either. So he can be a guy who can be impactful at really all levels of the field. And I'm excited for some of the things I think that Andy Reid will be able to, draw up for him. He seems to be a really good character guy as well. I think he'll really fit into that room nicely. And, I'm really happy where the wide receiver room is at right now. And I don't think there have been many recent off seasons where I've said that outside of last year. And, we were really happy with it this time last year, and then injuries struck, and all of a sudden you're, scratching your head and wondering why, and, why can't they, have greater depth and, more talent at that group. And,
Yeah.
It's just hard when injury strikes, but I think right now they have a really nice combination, nice blend of talent, really throughout all levels of their roster. And I mean, you think about a guy like Tyquan Thornton, who's a high draft pick who kind of flamed out with a team like the Patriots that wasn't very good when he was there. And, he's a guy who's got a ton of speed as well, who could, potentially, add to the mix that they've got going on. You've got guys who've been there for a while. You got, Justin Ross, right? A guy who's been there a long time, who's been popular during the offseason because his ability to make plays at training camp, but hasn't really been able to put things together on the field on, the 53-man roster yet. But, that's a guy to keep an eye on to see if, he finally takes the jump. And, I'd say the final piece of the puzzle in my eyes, the kid out of Florida, Elijah Badger, a lot of people thought he was going to be, drafted, right? Thought he was going to be out there and, be like a 4th, 5th round pick type in that range, the early day 3 type of player. And all of a sudden he goes undrafted, ends up in Kansas City. And I think he's a guy who adds value on special teams. He's another guy who's kind of a bigger body at the receiver position, can add, some ability in the run game, run blocker, and, has that speed to impact the game deep passing game. Mac Delana, really fast player, slot receiver probably at this level, or a return specialist. And then, kind of wild card Jimmy Holiday, a guy who earned, again, a position group that's really stacked, right? That they've basically got, four deep, at the wide receiver group, and you add a Jimmy Holiday off of a rookie minicamp tryout. That always catches your attention. Okay, what can that guy do? Well,
sure,
he's the type who is more of a gadget receiver and did a lot of that stuff for Louisiana Tech. And I think Andy Reid saw that and what he could do, on the offensive side of the ball, but then also Dave Toub saw, okay, he can do some of these games and whatnot on special teams as well with the new kick return, right? So I think that's a guy to watch out as someone who could, kind of have that dual role on offense and special teams, maybe make a name for himself. I don't know if he's a guy who could really rise up through the ranks of the roster, but, maybe practice squad player who fills that role.
Yeah, even Brownlee, big college career at Southern Miss, wasn't able to latch on with the Jets. But again, that's when things just weren't going well for the Jets. So not that that's been different the last 10 years or so. But do you think Royals, matter of fact, William even brought this up. Do you think Royals is someone that could actually fit better in the slot? Do you see him more as a slot? Do you think the Chiefs see him more as a slot, especially if Rice, for whatever reason, just isn't able to come back or re-injures himself or something like that? Could you see Royals as more of a full-time slot guy?
Yeah, I could definitely see him playing in the slot. I don't think, he's a guy who I would call one-dimensional by any means. I think you can really kind of move him around where you need him. I think for Kansas City, he's the type who will play either the slot or maybe the X role. I think he could play Z. I just think they have some guys there that they're probably confident and comfortable in. But I would say those are kind of the two spots where, he's not necessarily your traditional X receiver in terms of his size or anything like that. But the Chiefs don't really use a traditional X wide receiver anyways. So, the ability to move around the formation to do the different wide receiver stacks and stuff like that, I think, that's going to be a positive for him. And, they're going to find unique ways to use him. I think, anytime Andy Reid brings a new receiver into the offense, unless it's a guy who's got a fairly defined role or, doesn't have the speed and agility with the ball in his hands, Andy's going to find a way to use him. Find some sort of, trick or gimmick play or something that he's really good at and, use him that way. So I think I'm excited for what that is for Royals. I think whatever it may be, I think the early stuff is going to be kind of more that yards after catch role, which obviously does fit kind of better in that slot type of receiver position because you're going to get more space there anyways. But yeah, I do kind of like the versatility he brings to the wide receiver position for Kansas City.
And then as we wrap up, speaking regarding the draft picks, Brashard Smith, the 7th round draft pick, another playmaker who can fit a variety of roles. 3-year career wide receiver out of Miami, moves to running back at SMU, and a player that when you look at him on film, especially this past year, man, there's just so much to like about him. To me, I just, again, I think if he had maybe just more experience, which will come at the position, I think he could have a really good career. And once again, I think it's the perfect spot. If anybody's going to know how to use him the proper way, it's going to be Andy Reid.
Yeah, I really do think it's the perfect spot. I've been wanting for Andy Reid to get kind of a player that has that running back wide receiver flexibility, because I think there's so much that he could do and unlock with the offense, with the motion game, with the wide receiver running back combo type player. A guy who can run the ball, carry the ball in the backfield, but you can flex him out, motion him out to wide receiver position, give Patrick more information, and a guy that he trusts, when handing the ball off and then flexing him out. I really think that's a fun aspect of this. And then obviously the special teams game, I think, is going to be big for him, young in his career. I think he can really impact on the kick return game and potentially as a punt returner as well. A very fast player. I mean, you look at what he did at SMU, he was really a workhorse for that offense this last year. And he's not going to be asked to do that in Kansas City, but to know he can do that is a good thing. And they could potentially develop into a player that could be kind of that top back, because obviously, again, going back to it, the 2022 NFL draft, found another gem in the late rounds in the 7th round in Isaiah Pacheco. And, this next year he's going to be a free agent. And last year he didn't finish the year off very strong because he was coming off the injury and just wasn't playing as fast as he was used to playing and wasn't as effective running the ball as he'd been in past years. Now you've got a pretty stout backfield. Kareem Hunt makes his return to Kansas City last year, but, didn't have training camp under his belt. And he's even admitted that he thinks that hurt him this last year and that he wasn't quite as prepared for the rigors of the season because of it. He's been through an Andy Reid training camp a couple times before, so he knows what that's like and how that helps him prepare. And I think, he's looking forward to that this year because I think it'll give him a greater opportunity to impact the game longer throughout the season, get him prepared for that. And, if you have a healthy 1-2 punch of Pacheco Hunt early on in the season, I think it will keep them both fresh. And then you add, like I mentioned earlier, we were talking about Elijah Mitchell. You add him to the mix. You add a Brashard Smith to the mix. Obviously, Carson Steele in year 2, potential as a fullback.
Much deeper now.
Right? A lot deeper. A lot of chances for some guys to take a step forward after kind of down year or a return year, so to speak. And you add some new fresh faces to the mix. A guy that is probably not getting as much talk right now and probably, should be on the radar is Elijah Young. Very similar body type to Brashard Smith. I know the Chiefs really like him to the point where, they were comfortable, telling Keontae Ingram, hey, you got an injury. We're going to waive injury you, and you're going to end up on injured reserve. He'll probably at some point, or if he hasn't already, have a injury settlement and leave. So now, that's another veteran that's been in the building a couple of years who's gone. So you have an opportunity for a young player to kind of take that slot and potentially be, that primary back that they keep on the practice squad. So really exciting young backfield right now. I think, the guys kind of behind Kareem and Pacheco, and it's going to be interesting to see how it slots out, because right now, usually keep about 4 guys at that position group. And, are they going to keep a fullback in Carson Steele, or are they going to keep Elijah Mitchell, or are they going to keep, a guy like Young around? I think, you can, you put in ink that Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco and Brashard Smith are going to be there.
Yes.
So how the rest of it kind of plays out is kind of up to a guy like Carson Steele. Does he take a big step forward this year? Is he going to be valuable on special teams as a return specialist? Is he going to be trusted on special teams as a coverage guy? Or is it going to be Elijah Young, or is it going to be Elijah Mitchell, right? Who kind of,
and Mitchell and Pacheco also have to stay healthy.
Right. And that's another element of it too, right?
Yep.
Health is always the big thing. And as we know, for the running back position, as Chiefs fans are all too aware after many recent years, you need a lot of those guys just to get through not just training camp in the offseason, but also the regular season. Because you're going to run into some injuries there. It's one of the most oft injured positions in the NFL. It can be hard to find guys on a moment's notice. You're not going to always be so lucky to be able to find a Kareem Hunt off his couch.
No, that's
the 2 or 3 weeks.
Play that hand already.
Yeah, exactly. So, they're going to have to, have some interesting things there. Before we get out of here, I do want to talk about the tight end position too.
Well, yeah, actually, I wasn't. Yeah, that was the last one because it's the one position that we have not talked about. But I wanted to kind of two-part it with the fact that I wanted to bring up Brennan Stool as a UDFA because he had a very good, productive career at Clemson. Does the team see him more as like a slot kind of guy? Because he's not an inline tight end. And then also, again, speaking about the tight ends, Wiley was an interesting pick last year, injury, kind of redshirted. So this will be a big year for him. So, yes, let's talk about that. And then we'll wrap up the depth chart part by I want to ask you basically to give me, because you give me a lot of UDFAs to consider. I want to get like your best, like maybe your, because you give me there's like about 7 or 8 to choose from here, or maybe even 10. I miscount. So maybe the ones that you really seriously think have a shot to make the team. So go ahead and start with Brennan Stool.
Right. Brennan Stool, I think, he's an intriguing guy. I think you turn on some of his tape from like early in his Clemson career, even kind of later in his Clemson career. He's got some plays that are like just eerily reminiscent of like early Travis Kelce. And I think that like that's probably what the Chiefs saw in him too, and why they kind of prioritized him. I think out of all of their UDFAs, I think he got the most in terms of guaranteed money.
Okay.
So I think he's a guy that they really like. They wanted to make sure they brought to Kansas City. Actually, one of our colleagues at A to Z Sports is a friend of his. They played, I think, high school ball together, in fact, and he was at his like draft party, and he was texting me. He was like, "Whoa, my guy just ended up at your team. This is crazy," and I think, it's clear that he had some palpable excitement about joining a team with such a rich history at the tight end position. Tony Gonzalez, Travis Kelce.
Oh, yeah.
Even Jason Dunn. I mean, all these guys, just the history of the tight end position and what it's been and what it's meant to this team. And how Andy Reid has also used the tight end position in his career. One of the great coaches at getting the most out of the tight end position. So I know that Brennan Stool is excited about the opportunity. And I think, the Chiefs probably envision him more as kind of like another redshirt type guy who, maybe he is, someone who's part of the succession plan when Kelce rides off into the sunset in the future. I think it'll be more by like committee approach. I don't think you're going to find ever a one-to-one replacement for such a talented player. But, if he can even provide just the pass catching of what, Kelce provided to this team, he'll be an asset, right? And maybe he can develop as like an inline player in the future with some blocking ability and so on and so forth. I don't think he's going to be the fastest guy, but I do think he does have some yak ability and some ability to get open in some tight spaces on the field. And, he's got that solid 6'6" frame and, decent arm length to go up and pluck the ball. Not the longest guy, but good enough to get the job done. And I think he's someone who could play a role in the future. Trey Watson, a guy from I think he played at Rio Rancho High School in New Mexico.
Oh,
I've been trying to ask him. I got to ask him my my New Mexico question that I ask everybody, which is, red, green, or Christmas. I'm talking about chili, right? trying to get his answer there. I gotta see what he likes, but I think he's an intriguing guy too. Probably has more of a pass catching, special teams type skill set rather than pass blocking. More of like an H-back type in my eyes than maybe your traditional tight end. I don't think he's got the same type of length or size as like a Brenning Stool, but interesting player, someone who I'm excited to see a little bit more at training camp this offseason, OTAs as well. Jared Wiley, you mentioned before, had the injury. I think, when you look at how this position group plays out, I think it all depends on where Wiley's at in his recovery. I don't know if he's even running yet. He had the knee injury kind of like mid-season, right? So I don't really know how far along he is in that.
Okay.
And where he's going to be. Is that a guy that starts the season on the PUP list, or is that a guy who is ready to go, before the end of training camp? I think that's like going to be a big question, and that's going to play into, how does this position group look? Because if a guy like Wiley starts on the PUP list, that frees up a spot for maybe a guy like Brenning Stool to sneak on the roster.
Yep.
Or maybe it's a veteran like Robert Tonyan, who's spent a lot of time this offseason working with Patrick Mahomes out in Texas, right? So maybe that's a guy who kind of reignites his career in Kansas City as kind of that third tight end, a guy who can play special teams, a guy who's shown some pass-catching chops in his career, has been a solid rotational type guy. The tight end position, he's even been a starter type at the tight end position in Green Bay in the past, I believe. So that's a guy who could potentially, slot in there in addition to.
Didn't he have one of those years where he scored like a bunch of touchdowns, like a limited amount of snaps? I remember something like that.
Yeah. I think he had one of those years with Aaron Rodgers there at Green Bay where like he was like the favorite red zone target.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So anyway, that leads us to just overlooking the entire UDFA class. So give me, starting with Brennan Stool, give me the players that you think, if you had a wager on that, in order, you don't have to give me an exact order, but the players that you say, okay, this guy will go into my class of UDFAs that I think has a legitimate shot of making the team, not even just the practice squad. So
I will give you, obviously, there's things that can change, injuries, this, that, and the other thing. I think, the one we just talked about, if Jared Wiley starts out on the PUP, that opens path for Brenning Stool to make the 53. I think, there are some other situations that are kind of similar to that. On the defensive side of the ball, I'd say, we didn't really talk about him, but Izzard as a guy who potentially, depending on how things play out.
Another guy.
Right. Potentially how things play out at the interior defensive line position. Like he's a guy who could sneak in there, right? Based on, injuries or just the type of role he'd be playing, his potential nose tackle type, bigger body, someone who probably fulfills more of that run stopping need than he would a pass rushing need early on. Then I think, we mentioned Melvin Smith Jr. as a guy who could potentially as slot depth, right? Be that guy who offers a little bit of versatility there and could maybe be the sixth or fifth guy in the cornerback room, right?
You think Major Williams has a shot, or is he definitely more of a practice squad guy?
I think he's probably a long shot at this point, but
okay.
You look at the safety group right now, and I would say Jaden Hicks, Brian Cook, Mike Edwards are kind of your locks. So that's kind of the and then Shamari Connor as well. So you got kind of four guys who are kind of like slotted in there already. You got a veteran in Deion Bush who's spent time on the active and the practice squad before. I think, if there's a way to get him on the roster, the Chiefs might look into that because he's had some big moments, had a key interception in the AFC Championship game a couple of years back. So I think, it's going to be a tough competition how that plays out. is he the type of guy who can offer enough on special teams? He's a game changer at the kick return game, which, this year with the changes they've made to it and how they're trying to get the kick return percentages up, maybe that's something the Chiefs are more willing to take a chance on and have that extra guy. So I think he's definitely a name, Major Williams, to keep an eye on. I do think, like we mentioned before, S. Pohl as a guy who could maybe be the Ethan Driscoll of this year, and maybe doesn't see a lot of playing time, but gets that 53rd roster spot as a guy they don't want to see get out of their grasp or get claimed by another team. I think that's a strong possibility as well.
So you think would you favor Pohl over Cooper?
I would favor Pohl over Cooper, I believe. Okay. Yeah, I think he's just got a higher ceiling in terms of what he could be and the value he brings right now.
What about the receivers? Badger, is he at the top of the list?
I don't think any of the undrafted receivers are going to make it this year. I think it's just too competitive of a group right now. I mean, Worthy, Brown, Royals, Rice, Smith-Schuster, Remigio right there, and you got 6. And I don't even know that you can keep 6 this year with how many players you're going to have to keep at some other spots. I think, maybe 5 guys, and is a veteran like Schuster, the odd man out when you've added a guy like Royals to the mix, or, is a guy like Sky Moore going to finally rise to the occasion and prove that he deserves a roster spot and deserves playing time? I don't know. I'll give you one more that I think could really surprise and actually earn like a big role on the team, a starting role on the team. The punter, Chaplicki, he's a guy that, you look at what Matt Ariza did a year ago, and it wasn't great. It wasn't what I think they were hoping for it to be. He's got the leg. I don't think he's got the finesse that they're looking for at that position. So a guy like Chaplicki out of USC is someone who I think is going to give Ariza a run for his money. And if he can show a little bit more finesse in his punting ability, I think that's a guy that they could end up signing long term, and maybe they turn around and flip Ariza for, maybe a player or, late round draft pick, or just, cut him loose, whatever it may be.
Okay. So you would then say, it looks like you would go down to Brennanstool, Pohl, how do you pronounce his name? Chaplicki?
I think it's Chaplicki.
Chaplicki, like a CH or SH. Chaplicki. And we'll put Melvin Smith in there as well.
I would put Melvin Smith in there as well. I put Major Williams in that bucket, and then maybe Izzard to go with guys who could make it. I don't say any of them. I wouldn't say any of them are likely to make it, because it's very hard to make a 53-man roster as an undrafted free agent. But I can see paths for all those players to make it right now without really having seen much of them. Without things could change entirely when the pads come on. One of these defensive backs could just look infinitely faster than the rest of the guys, and suddenly and this happened kind of last year, right? We can think back to the conversation we had maybe last year around this time, and I don't think a guy like Chris Roland Wallace was at all on my radar, and then I get to training camp and all of a sudden he's one of the fastest players on the field. That really stood out to me. Or a guy like Ethan Driscoll, he stood out to me because of his size. He just seemed that much bigger and that much more of a bully than some of these other offensive linemen they had brought in. So, there are things that we don't quite know yet. No, we won't know until, we get into the late stages of July and early August. But I think, when you look at this roster, I think the Chiefs really hit, this offseason, all the needs, all the areas they had to hit in order to stay competitive, stay at the level that they're become accustomed to. Really did a nice job, I think, of, adding pieces on the offensive side of the ball after really focusing defensive heavy for a few years. And, within that, also adding pieces to the defense to make sure they prepare for the future and things that are, bound to come, when they have some departures and things that they're just going to have to prepare for.
All right. So I want to close out by talking to you about the schedule. So we'll just spend 2 minutes here on the schedule, which is a very interesting schedule because I was going over it, and I believe 11 of the 17 teams are really are either considered like the top teams in the league, or I shouldn't say the teams, the games. 11 of the 17 are either against the top teams in the league or prime time. So it's like one or the other. There's only 6 of them that are just your every day, every Sunday kind of, regular game, regular kind of deal. So that's that. And it starts on the day after the season starts with the Friday night game against the Chargers of all teams, and then the Eagles in week number 2.
That starts pretty rough. I mean,
wow.
I look at that particularly, and I
Brazil.
think, yeah, the Brazil game in my eyes is a must win because you're a potential of starting the season 0-2 if you don't win that game. Because you look at the Eagles, they're opening the day before you, so on Thursday. So they get extended rest, right? And they don't have to travel 4,000 plus miles to and from Brazil, right? So the Chiefs get long rest, but do they really, because they're traveling, right? I think that is kind of a disadvantage to Kansas City in a game that, they're really going to be looking to get the upper hand, especially playing at their home field. And losing as badly, getting whooped as badly as they did in the Super Bowl against the Eagles. So I think you're really at risk of starting the season off on the wrong foot if you don't get that win in week 1. Doubt starts to creep in, and I think they're used to these big stages, and I wouldn't want to be the Chargers facing them coming off of that embarrassing Super Bowl loss, because they're going to be looking to play loose and get some angst out, especially guys who are playing in that game. But we'll just kind of see how it transpires. But the first 2 games definitely stand out to me. A couple other things that stood out to me on the schedule. I think if you fast forward to week 12, I think we play the Colts. Yeah, week 12 against the Colts. That's one of those regular games you were talking about. However, this is the only game that they play against a team that's coming off of a bye week. So that's one that I kind of have circled. That's always something to keep in mind. Teams with extra rest, how that's going to impact you. And they come off of a stretch. If you scroll back, they're coming off a stretch of games. I think they're playing the Broncos. I think before that they got their bye week, but they got the Bills, right? So the Commanders, they're coming off some really tough. The Raiders, just a really tough stretch of games. Even though they have the bye week, right? They've got that really tough stretch of games ahead of time. So you're looking at that extra rest, and you're like, oh man, that could be the sneaky game where they have the disappointing loss. That they always seem to have one of these at some point where it's like a team you don't expect them to lose to, and they kind of let their guard down and they get got. And I've circled that week 12 game as potentially one that could be that. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with the schedule this year compared to last. I mean, they don't have that crazy stretch where they're playing, 10 game or 3 games in the course of 11 days or whatever it was, where that was just, I know, grueling for the players.
Yeah.
Even though they did well in that stretch of games, I just think, the league kind of learned from that. And, they notice and recognize that this team is their bell cow. Has become their bell cow, even more so than the Dallas Cowboys. When they want ratings, when they want the big marquee matchups, the prime times, this is the team they want in it. This team, not only does the league want them in it, but the broadcast networks do, because they know what it's going to do to the numbers. And that's what all these networks are searching for and looking for, the broadcast numbers, and how that's going to kind of play out. And I think seeing them on Christmas Day again, seeing them on Thanksgiving against the Cowboys, right? All these big primetime spots and national television spots is just indicative of the fact that this team has become something more than just a team that wins a lot of games, but they're a moneymaker for the league and a moneymaker for these big broadcast companies, and they're wanted, and that has to feel good if you're the Kansas City Chiefs. Has to feel good if you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan, because there was a time where I remember watching teams back in the day. I'm wearing like my Marcus Allen Chiefs hat, whatnot, to kind of date myself and the teams and whatnot that I've seen come through. but there were times that we were begging for just one primetime game as humble fans of this team and this franchise. And now the whole Chiefs Kingdom fan base, I think, comes together and appreciates the fact that, this type of thing doesn't come around too often, that this is a really special team that they've built and a special part of this franchise's history. And it's just a fun thing to be around, a fun thing to get an opportunity to analyze as a journalist and as someone who covers the team. So
absolutely.
Really
just look at the Patriots. I mean, because when it came to an end, look what happened.
It came crashing down. But hey, they might have a decent team this year. You never know. Mike Vrabel's kind of a
sure.
He's a bit of a wild card. He could have a really great team, or he could have a stinker. So we'll see what he does in the first year in Patriots land.
Yeah, but absolutely, it's going to be a very tough season schedule-wise. Mixing all these, especially early on in the season, that's really where the Chiefs are going to know what's up, because you got all of those games like the Eagles and the Ravens and the Lions and Washington and Buffalo, all these games before the bye, and then the primetime games and going to Brazil, and that's a lot. So when they come out of the bye, things are a little bit easier, even though there's still some tough games, and you got the Thanksgiving and the Christmas. But it's a highly entertaining schedule. There's no doubt about it. Might be the most entertaining schedule in the entire NFL, based on the primetime games and the opponents. So,
the other thing about the schedule, and I wrote about this, right after the schedule came out. I look at a guy that we've spoken a lot about today in terms of Kingsley Suamataia and potentially being the starter at left guard. It's not an easy schedule for someone playing the guard position. I look back to his rookie season, and he got thrown into the fire in that season as well, where he had some really just disadvantageous matchups early on that, play against the first week of the season, he was playing against the Baltimore Ravens, who have some pretty decent pass rushers there. But second week, you go up against the Cincinnati Bengals. And their edge rusher, I believe, Hendrickson, ended up leading the league in sacks that year, right? And that's a guy who just, put him in a blender. Well, first 2 weeks in the season, you get a Chargers defensive line that doesn't have a lot of household names, but has some good veteran players there who can challenge him. And it's kind of similar in the sense of, that's what the Ravens had last year. And, he looked pretty good in that first game. And then you go up against a guy like Hendrickson and it all falls apart. Well, the second game, he's going to be going up that Eagles interior defensive line that gave this team hell in the Super Bowl. So
nice measuring stick right away.
Yeah. Jalen Carter is going to give him that measuring stick and let us know if this guy can really truly be a starting left guard for this team, and not be a liability. And that's going to be a tough thing for anyone. It doesn't matter who you are. You put the all-pro Joe Thuney there, he's probably going to have some reps that he's going to want back. So I think that, that's going to be very telling how he handles that game. Should he earn the starting job? And, I think the Chiefs will learn a lot about, their offensive line in those first couple of weeks of the season, especially the interior spots.
All right, Charles, appreciate it. Nice long conversation about the Kansas City Chiefs, the NFL's darling team, as you kind of put it, which you're right on the nose about that. Why not? They win Super Bowls. They've got the best quarterback, and they're very entertaining to watch. So why not do a 90-minute off-season look back at the Kansas City Chiefs?
Hey, I'll give you one more thing before we get out of here. And I know that we that this is the time of year that this gets said, right? The best shape of your life season, right? But
yes,
Patrick Mahomes has been on a mission this offseason, right? And I think we're going to get a very motivated, very different Patrick Mahomes this year than we had last year. I think he took a lot of ownership over the fact that he did not play up to his own standards.
I couldn't believe how poorly he was playing in that game. Even early in the game, because that's
not just
really,
even in the Super Bowl, just period,
in
paragraph.
general.
Like
Yeah.
throughout the whole season, I think, he looks back at his whole body of work and he says, this season was not my best. In fact, it was probably my worst. And, I think it was a bit of a wake up call for him in terms of what he needs to change about, not just his habits and his routine, but, how he attacks the off season. And I think, Chiefs fans are going to see very shortly, once things get rolling with OTAs coming up next week, that Mahomes is in the best shape of his life and he's going to be looking for blood.
Okay. Very good to know, especially for anybody out there that might have doubted him and you were thinking of drafting him in your fantasy league this year. There you go. Don't count out Patrick Mahomes. I don't think anybody was, but hey, you never know. Again, like I led off the show with, Super Bowl losers, they tend to struggle, but this is Patrick Mahomes. This is Andy Reid, and I don't really anticipate that. That's a struggle for the Chiefs. Is probably going to mean, well, maybe they don't win the division this year, but they're still going to the playoffs. They're just way too talented.
They're a struggle for this team, like an actual struggle would be somehow like winning less than 10 games. That would be a real struggle,
especially with that schedule. Team. Yeah.
The struggle that I would expect is maybe like, a 12 win season compared to what we've seen, right? Like, a very different type of struggle than what is realistic for most fans in the NFL. And, I think that speaks to the consistency that, the GM, the head coach, and the quarterback have built throughout kind of their tenure here.
All right, Charles. So again, on-demand video, we're going to have links in the description of how you can check out Charles regarding content and podcasting. What's up with the podcasting?
No podcast for me.
Still no podcasting.
Yeah. We're, maybe we'll have something fun to share this season, but it's not cooking quite yet. But
okay.
You can follow me in all my work at Gold MCT NFL on X. I'm also on Blue Sky. I have a Facebook page as well. If you prefer to follow me on those platforms, you can reach out to me on X and I can send you that way. I don't have those in front of me or memorized at all, but you can always follow what I got going on at Gold MCT NFL on X. And then you can find my work at A2ZSports.com. And you can navigate to the Kansas City Chiefs section. You'll find most of my work there, but occasionally I'll stray out and do some other things around the NFL. You never know.
Okay. Well, again, we'll have links so you can quickly navigate to those pages that you just mentioned, Charles. And hey, if you're ever looking for a home somewhere where we can provide everything for you, just give us a call and we'll put on some regular Chief programming here on our network because they're just Chiefs. I mean, I don't know exactly what kind of traffic we could bring in when there's just the Chiefs, but we'll cut you a break. So anyway, Charles, appreciate it as always. Thanks for educating me big time before I got to write my piece of the draft review guide again. Just to remind everybody, this is last year's for our lads. The new one's coming out real soon. It'll be available to order the hard copy in late June, 3rd, maybe 4th week of June. Don't forget, you can get the PDF version. And once it's available, you won't have to wait for the mail or anything like that. So, Charles, appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you right around training camp a couple months away.
It's going to be exciting times. I can't wait. Counting Sundays.
Yes, aren't we all? All right. For Charles Goldman, I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in here to the Our Lads Football Network on ProLine TV.